What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. Okay, so continuing with House of M, now that I think about it, after recording that last video, because I haven't uploaded, I usually record like 4 or 5 videos in a day, but after recording that last video, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, maybe we should like do a really quick explanation of what happened in the House of M universe. So for the Civil War event, there was a House of M tie-in. Actually, there was a handful of House of M tie-ins. I want to say it was a story arc, but the idea was that it basically laid out how Magneto rose to power. And all that really happened over the course of those stories was that Magneto was basically attacked. You know, it was an attack on mutants in like the late 1970s, I want to say close to 1980, and that resulted in Magneto discovering a plot between the government and basically the military in an attempt to get rid of mutants. And the result was that the president at the time, I think it was Richard Nixon, was basically ousted, and then mutant lives were put at the top of the list in terms of priority. That is to say, mutants could not be harmed. Now, this had the benefit of making sure that Xavier's dream of a peaceful coexistence came to fruition, but it was only ever temporary. What ended up happening here was that mutants basically began to infiltrate all different forms of government because nobody could attack them, nobody could harm them. Going through and killing a mutant was treated harshly than killing a human. And the result was that new laws were passed by mutants for mutants, and then eventually Magneto used the entire conflict as a rallying point, took over Genosha, and then made himself leader. He literally became Charles Xavier, but on a not really an evil scale, but on a more power-hungry scale. And the result was that Magneto basically rose to prominence as the most powerful being in the world in terms of political power as well as his capabilities, because remember, Magneto controls anything that has to do with metal with the electromagnetic spectrum, and so he could kill people by just pulling the metal out of their bodies, so on and so forth, and he's wildly capable in terms of his abilities. But again, you know, kind of following up to where we left off in the last video, this is again another instance where Bendis just kind of shows that nobody knows what Layla Miller's powers are, and the reason why we say that is because when it comes to fleshing out people's abilities, this is one of the foremost traits of Emma Frost. It's not the sole purpose she serves, but when it comes to different mutants whose powers are investigated, it's usually Emma Frost who does that. For example, she took control of Iceman's body one day and then came to the realization that if he ever gained full control of his abilities and pushed them to the extreme, he would be an Omega level mutant. The same thing with Jubilee. The Jubilee is basically detonating matter on a subatomic scale. She's just not doing it on a huge degree. But if she ever tapped into the full gambit of her powers, the result was that she'd be able to just basically create nuclear explosions on the world. She could just detonate matter on a scale that would just create the equivalent of atomic blast. She'd be able to wipe out entire cities. It'd be insane how powerful she is. Emma Frost is always kind of the go-to person for figuring out how it is that people's powers work. And even non-mutants. For example, during the events of New Avengers, which will actually come out after this, Brian Michael Bendis launched the story reintroducing Robert Reynolds as Who is the Sentry? And the idea was to basically explore the personas of Robert Reynolds and the Void. And this is when Emma Frost began to dive in and began to realize if the Void ever reached full potential, full power, it would be totally unstoppable. And so again, Emma Frost serves this important role. And so with her showing up here and basically investigating the mind of Layla Miller, trying to figure out how her powers work, and then saying, well, we don't know. And Layla Miller just kind of saying, well, I just know stuff. Again, as Ben is basically saying, she's supposed to be a throwaway. She's supposed to be a character that's supposed to go away at the end of all this. Now, the cool thing is that she won't. And in fact, Layla Miller will become one of the coolest characters in Marvel Comics for a little while. Like, she was really interesting for a time, especially with her whole part of, I want to say X Factor Investigations. Is that right? X Factor Investigations with Jamie Madrox? I want to say that's what X Factor became following the House of M. And I want to say they operated out of Mutant Town. At least I'm pretty sure that was the case. But that was all part of Decimation, which comes directly after this. But the idea is that, again, you know, with Cyclops coming back, again, Cyclops and Emma Frost being a couple, Cyclops is woken up as well. And this is when Cyclops is just like, what? You know, and he just kind of starts puking his guts up after realizing that he and Emma Frost were kind of together. Not only that, it was also the notion that everything around him's been screwed up. Everything around him's been changed. Now, at this point, it's just kind of like this mad dash to start waking up people left and right. First, they go to Peter Parker. And I think Peter Parker is one of the best parts of this, because in this world that Spider-Man lived, in this House of M universe, Peter Parker was married to Gwen Stacy, Aunt May, and was still with Uncle Ben because Uncle Ben was still alive. He literally had everything he wanted. The issue here is that for his character, he basically had to kind of masquerade as a mutant. He had to pretend that he was a mutant, because if people found out he was a human, he wouldn't be anywhere near the same kind of freedoms that mutants have. And so instead of simply saying, well, hey, I was bitten by a radioactive spider one day and I gained the powers of Spider-Man, Spider-Man, he just said, well, it was a genetic mutation. I have a genetic mutation that gives me the abilities of a spider. And so because of this, where he's waking up is basically him realizing it's all gone. You know, the death of Gwen Stacy at the hands of Green Goblin, Venom, being married to Mary Jane Watson, all these aspects are part of his life that everything he's lived is not real. And it's a crushing experience for him because he learns this while he's out shopping with Gwen Stacy, Uncle Ben, and Aunt May. And so he basically has to look around and has to realize that everybody that he knows is gone. Everybody he knows, everybody that he cares about is no longer part of the equation here. But continuing this trend of going through and waking up various people, I mean, this extends to Kitty Pryde, to Dr. Stephen Strange, to Carol Danvers. Carol Danvers is kind of the messed up one because it's like they go to her and they're like, hey, look, remember how, you know how like you're the most popular superhero in the world? And she's like, yeah. It's like, well, you're actually really irrelevant. Like, you're powerful, but like no one really cares about you that much. Sorry. It's kind of a messed up situation. But again, you know, Daredevil, Matt Murdock, I mean, all these people are just being woken up. Now, the cool thing is they actually run up on Steve Rogers. And the idea is like, well, they know who he is because remember, in Marvel Comics, Captain America is a rallying point. I mean, Captain America, what he says is almost law. Like when Captain America comes along and says, hey guys, look, I think we should take this course of action, the discussion's over. People are like, okay, let's do that. Like that's how Captain America functions in Marvel Comics. And it's so cool. It's one of the coolest things because people trust him. That's one of the reasons why Hydra Captain America is so cool. And that's why I am hyped for Secret Empire because it's gonna be it's gonna be one of the coolest things to see what happens when the superheroes learn the hero they trust the most is a bad guy. But in the end, they basically say, look, it'd be cool to have Captain America on our side. Steve Rogers is an old man. Physically, he can't fight. And so even if they were to wake him up and let him know what was going on, I mean, one, the shock might kill him. And two, he would be virtually useless to them because there'd be really nothing he could offer, which is a total changeover from the things that we're used to seeing. I mean, it would almost be like Steve Rogers is the one guy you want in your corner, but they don't have him. There's no need for him because he's not there. Now from here, we also end up picking up with Clint Barton. Now again, Clint Barton effectively learns that he was killed by Scarlet Witch. Remember, during the events of Avengers Disassembled, we talked about this in the last video, during the events of Avengers Disassembled, when the Scarlet Witch basically attacked the Avengers and started manifesting all these Kree warships out of thin air, that Clint Barton basically sacrificed himself to destroy the Kree mothership. Now, why he couldn't just take the quiver off his back so he wouldn't die, I have no idea. But the fact remains here that he ends up just sacrificing himself because of what it was that the Scarlet Witch did. He learns that here. He learns you're supposed to be dead. Like, you're not supposed to be alive. You're supposed to be gone. And so for him, it's a crushing experience because what he does is he temporarily runs out on him. Now, of course, he ends up coming back, but then this also coincides with the arrival of like Toad, Mystique, Jessica Drew, Rogue, all these characters basically being told, hey, look, what you know in this House of M is not how things are supposed to be. Their memories are basically restored, or at least they're woken up to how things are supposed to be. Now, the funny thing about this is that when Mystique finds out that she was sleeping with Wolverine, that the two of them were together, like she freaks out and slaps him. How dare you? Like, she just freaks out and slaps him. And it's just a funny reaction because, you know, it's a very human reaction for her, but Mystique is very inhuman in the sense that I mean, she's a mutant, but like she's really cold and calculating too. And so it's kind of a funny situation here. But with Hawkeye effectively running out, the idea is, look, we don't have time to worry about him because all he really does is shoot arrows anyway. Who cares? We have bigger fish to fry. And so what happens is they all basically start making these battle preparations. They start making these battle plans. Of course, they take over one of the SHIELD helicarriers. And the idea is we have to go take out Magneto. We have to force him to basically set things back to the way that they're supposed to be. Now, from here, it's kind of like this great big huge gala that's being held this day. It's almost like all roads are leading to this particular moment. And we have the arrival of Dr. Doom. Now, this was a tie-in that came into the House of M by way of the Fantastic Four. And Victor Von Doom, really, you know, like Reed Richards, Susan Storm, all those guys, they were dead. The only one that survived the experience of the whole cosmic radiation thing was Ben Grimm. But the idea here is that Victor Von Doom isn't so much like an equal to Magneto. I mean, nobody is, but he has been plotting to overthrow him. But even then, Victor Von Doom knows this is a fool errand just because of the fact that Magneto could easily kill him if he chose to. But the whole idea was that Victor Von Doom was trying to find a way to subvert Magneto's control of the world. And what this does is this really begins to sort of go into what Jonathan Hickman would focus on some 4 or 5 years after the story was written with the Fantastic Four, when the Council of Reeds, that is to say this council of all these different Reed Richards from the multiverse, would basically say, no matter what universe you're in, Victor Von Doom will always try to acquire absolute absolute power. That's what he does. That's how he is. No matter what his circumstance is, he will always try to attain absolute power. It's the intrinsic basis behind himself. Now, in terms of the House of M being a dream universe and in terms of Dr. Doom getting everything that he wanted, this is basically him, replacing the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four never existed here. But again, this is just kind of Bendis' interpretation of what it is that Dr. Doom would want. In truth, I think the best interpretation of what Dr. Doom wants most was during the Ultimate Fantastic Four when he switched bodies with Reed Richards, when he became Reed Richards. That was one of the coolest things when it came to that line of stories. But that more or less seems to be the goal here within this story, that there are no Fantastic Four, that there's no one there to challenge the rule of Dr. Doom except for Magneto. And even then, he's working against Magneto to take his place. Now, Magneto knows this, and Dr. Doom knows that he knows. But Magneto pretends that Dr. Doom doesn't know, and Dr. Doom pretends to believe that he believes that Magneto doesn't know. But he knows that he knows. Everybody knows. Under Siege 2, Dark Territory, I love you. But regards to all the characters that are going on, all the things that are happening here right now, this is again really just kind of like a last ditch effort. I mean, you have really like a combination of heroes and villains working with one another for the purpose of setting everything back to rights. And so what this does is this coincides with a Sentinel basically crash landing or intending to crash land in Genosha. Of course, Magneto is able to keep this from happening, but then it's basically this huge onslaught by Spider-Man, She-Hulk, all these different characters all showing up at the same time in order to basically fight off Magneto. Now, the cool thing about this is that while that main conflict is going on, it serves as a distraction. That's really all it is. Pay a lot of attention to everything going on here so that you don't look over there. And the reason why nobody wants anyone to look over there is because Cloak and Dagger, Layla Miller, and Emma Frost are going to try to find Charles Xavier. But the issue is they basically run across his headstone. Now remember, because of the fact that Cloak can teleport and make himself intangible, he goes underground only to find out that there is no casket. There's no body. There's no nothing. This is more of a memorial than an actual grave for Charles Xavier. And so the question is, where is Charles Xavier? Now, at this point, we transition over to Dr. Stephen Strange, who basically makes his way into the personal quarters of Scarlet Witch. And this is cool because Scarlet Witch knows everything. I mean, it's not like she altered her own memories in the process. She remembers everything that's going on here, right? I mean, she's just like, when Dr. Strange shows up and he says, you have to set everything back, you have to make things normal, where's Charles Xavier? She's like, I don't know where Charles Xavier is. And then this is when she basically starts to go through and give everybody, or at least give us as the reader, an explanation of what's going on. And what we learned was that back in the earlier part of the story, when Quicksilver and Magneto had this great big huge argument, it kind of left with Quicksilver and Magneto in the room and then switched over to Xavier's meeting with the Avengers and the X-Men, that Magneto basically left. And Quicksilver was talking to Scarlet Witch and said, you could fix this. You could make everything right. You could basically warp all existence. You could change reality and give everyone the world they dream of. You could give everyone the world that they love. Now, this was done by Quicksilver out of love. This was done for the life of his sister, to make sure that she stayed alive. But it was also done for the purpose of the family. It was done to basically make sure that no one would have a reason to seek out her death and destruction. And so with this particular revelation coming to Doctor Strange, of course, it gets passed on to Emma Frost, but then they're interrupted by Magneto. Now, this is probably one of the coolest moments in the story. I absolutely love this story. And the reason why is because when Magneto is basically woken up by the way things are supposed to be, he's woken up with the memories he had, plus whatever everybody knows at the time. And so it's kind of like this shared state. That is to say, Emma Frost just kind of gives him the knowledge of what led up to this moment. And this is when Magneto basically learns that Quicksilver screwed everything up. And so this is when we get this really cool moment where Magneto just kind of lashes out and just shouts, "What have you done in my name, boy?" And I love that so much because this is Magneto at his angriest. And we've never really seen him in this state before. We've seen Magneto irritated. We've seen him miffed. We've never seen him like lashing out, angry at the world. I think the closest that we ever really saw to this was when he ripped out the adamantium of Wolverine. But even then, he was more like irritated. It was more like, I'm tired of the X-Men getting in my way. Let this be an example, which of course led into the Onslaught saga when Xavier shut down his mind. But in his wrath, in his anger, Magneto kills Quicksilver. And in response to this, Scarlet Witch loses it. Now, this is why I say this is Scarlet Witch at her most powerful, the most powerful that she's ever been in the history of Marvel Comics, because her emotions come into it. For those of you guys who don't know, when it comes to characters with superpowers in Marvel Comics, their emotions usually govern the state of their powers. It is to say, they usually keep their powers in check with rational thinking. They keep their powers in check by trying to make sure things don't spiral out of control. But when a person's emotions get the best of them, their powers just run amok. Those mental safeguards they put in place to keep themselves protected end up losing it. They end up going absolutely insane. The only real exception to this that I could probably think of would be like Franklin Richards. Like Franklin Richards in its most powerful state was during Hickman's Fantastic Four, but that was because he had lived long enough that he was able to channel his powers in whatever way he needed to. Plus, he basically absorbed the powers of his younger self. So it was like two Franklin Richards in one. But that's just an instance of how a person can basically control themselves without allowing their emotional state to cause their powers to run amok. Molecule Man's the same way, but with Scarlet Witch, she was already mentally unstable, right? I mean, she was already basically insane. Now she's insane and she's grieving. And so she literally lashes out at Magneto and takes his mouth away. I mean, alters reality so he doesn't have a mouth anymore. He can't talk. And that's why I say things are kind of crazy, because when it comes to people who can warp reality on a cosmic scale, they usually just kind of like modify things, or they use their powers to make other people go away. They don't usually use them for like small purposes, like taking someone's mouth away. The only time I've ever actually seen this done, or seen something done like this, where reality itself was distorted in such a fashion, was during the Crooked World storyline with Mad Jim Jaspers, where you literally had Captain Britain trying to face off against Jim Jaspers, and Jim Jaspers kept changing reality around him, where like, you know, Captain Britain would suddenly be like in a schoolboy's clothes. It was weird the way things were unfolding, but it was basically showing that there was nothing he could do to stop Jim Jaspers. It was actually kind of a cool moment here. But this is also Scarlet Witch effectively lashing out. Now, something to keep in mind here is it's not just her emotional state. I mean, it is. She's very, very emotional here. I mean, she literally, you know, she really just like resurrects Quicksilver, but it's also all the pain and all the suffering that she has experienced. And the reason why is because you got to keep in mind, she remembers everything from before she altered reality with the House of M. So she remembers being chased after by people in small villages who considered her and Quicksilver to be freaks. She remembers being abandoned by Magneto, but then Magneto coming back and using them for his own ends, for his own evil schemes. She remembers having a relationship with Vision only for it to come crashing down when Vision's basically his personality was removed and he was just reduced back to a sentient robot. She believed that she had kids, and she did at one point, only to find out that they were basically just the shards of a demon entity named Mephisto who had been conquered or been defeated by Franklin Richards. All she's known is struggle and strife. All she's known is loss. That's it. And all that emotion, all that anger, all that wrath, all that pain and suffering, all finally comes to a boil. It all finally comes to a head. And when it does, just like anyone who can't take anymore, she just lets it all out. The problem is that when it comes to someone like the Scarlet Witch and the kind of power she possesses, there's splashover. All right, everybody gets a piece of the pie, whether you want it or not. And so she ends up just saying, no more mutants. And so things just kind of snap back. Reality goes back to normal, but when it does, 98% of the mutant population lose their powers. Now, this is not something known right off the bat. Instead, it's discovered over the course of a few minutes. Instead, well, I guess it is kind of right off the bat if it's a few minutes, but basically we just kind of jump back to New York. We pick up with Layla Miller, and then of course we end up joining an Avengers Tower where Peter Parker is back with Mary Jane Watson, but then we jump to the Xavier Institute. And what we end up having is Emma Frost outside the Xavier Institute with a full recollection of everything that had happened during the events of House of M, with the last utterance being no more mutants. When she gets into the Xavier Institute, all but 27 kids have lost their powers. They're all gone. I mean, vanished. They're humans. They have no abilities whatsoever. Now, there are a few people here that do have powers. For example, Nightcrawler still has his abilities. Wolverine, ironically enough, remembers everything like from his whole life. Every single thing. All the memories that he had that were screwed, you know, that were skewed, that were screwed up, where he couldn't tell what was true and false, all of those have come back to him and he remembers everything. And it's kind of interesting because this is basically a soft reboot for the character of Wolverine. That's basically what had happened to him, because one of the intrinsic aspects of his character over the course of his publication history was his memories. I mean, let's say that like tomorrow you wake up in a house of people that you don't recognize. You've never seen any of them before. And you say, what in the hell's going on? What am I doing here? And they say, well, what are you talking about? This is your home. You've always been here. I mean, you wouldn't know what to expect. Well, then let's say like as you're trying to figure out what's going on, some, you know, kid comes to you and says, hey, like they're lying to you. You've never been here before. This is not your home. Well, then what's true and what's not? Suddenly your entire life's in a tailspin, because you don't know if you've really been in that house the whole time. You don't know if they kidnapped you and messed with your head. You don't know what's going on. That was always the aspect of Wolverine. And one of the core concepts of his character was trying to flesh out the memories of which ones were real and which ones were false. Now he remembers everything. And so again, this is Marvel kind of going back and clearing out a lot of that history, removing a lot of those things. The downside to this is is that this will begin the downward slope of Wolverine. This will begin the downward fall of Wolverine, where his character will become more and more of a plot device, of a punchline within the realm of comics, as opposed to becoming someone that you can really kind of, not really identify with, but you can really kind of follow the struggles of as he's trying to regain his life. Now, with regards to the huge impact of the Scarlet Witch, when Emma Frost goes to Cerebro, remember this device that allows her to, or really allowed Xavier and those who use it to see the entirety of the mutant population, they find out there's only a few, like a handful here and there. There's, 5 or 6 dots kind of scattered around the world. What this means, and what we'll find out, is the entirety of the mutant population has been reduced down to 198 people. Where previously there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of mutants around the world, now there's only 198. Now keep in mind, this happens before Civil War. And so this is the reason why during the events of Civil War, the mutants never became involved. There was a tie-in where Tony Stark showed up and said, hey, like, I would really love to have you guys on my side. Emma Frost and Cyclops said, no, we have 198 mutants. We're certainly not going to put those lives in jeopardy for your stupid Civil War against Captain America. So they basically stayed hands off the entire time. Now, the reason why they were able to do that is because as this story goes on, what we end up having and going into the events of Decimation, which we'll talk more about that in another video, but what ends up happening is with the mutant population so low, humanity says, well, we kind of have to step in. We have to do something because of the fact that something happened here, even if it's only for the sake of self-preservation, to make sure that we keep all the mutants in one place. They basically turn, the Xavier Institute into a safe haven, where the remaining 198 mutants, or at least a handful of them, most of them, end up residing there. And so they were basically under government protection. The government was basically saying, you guys are not bound by the restrictions of the Superhuman Registration Act. That act doesn't apply to you. You do not have to register your identities, which doesn't matter anyway, because we all pretty much know who you are and we have you in one location. But of course, with Magneto being one of the people who lost his powers as well, the question everyone has, at least those who remember the events of House of M, the question they have is, where is Scarlet Witch? Where is Wanda Maximoff? Magneto has no idea. And so what this does is this begins to sort of bring the story to a close. And we end up joining this really cool monologue with Hank Pym. And what Hank's basically saying here is that when it came to mutant powers, they were composed of things. They were composed of matter. They manifested themselves as physical matter, and they resided within the body, whether it was, Wolverine's healing factor, whether it was somebody's ability to warp reality, whatever it was, those powers manifested physically, which means they couldn't all simply just vanish. They couldn't just disappear into thin air. Those powers had to go somewhere. Either those powers formed another planet, those powers became a star, those powers are just kind of dispersed on the atomic level and just floating out in the atmosphere, floating out in space, but they had to have gone somewhere. And the question is, where did those powers go? Now, eventually, this will all sort of come to a head in Avengers vs. X-Men almost 10 years after this story was written. But following the House of M, going into the future of Marvel Comics, it stopped being about the X-Men versus the X-Men, and it started being about character development. It started being about growing or kind of reestablishing the X-Men mythos with the numbers being reduced, how the X-Men deal with that, and all these different concepts that delve into that very idea. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.